Amendment to the amendment is in nature of a substitute to the committee print offered by Mr. Scott of Virginia, identifier SCOTVA_039.
Thank you. I recognize myself for 5 minutes on behalf of the amendment. This amendment is technical in nature to ensure that funds for program administration for workforce development that's provided under section 22014 are not just applicable for the Department of Labor workforce programs funded under Part 1 of Subtitle C. The amendment makes it clear that these program administration funds are available in other Department of Labor funded programs in the bill. That is for use in Subtitle C, Part 3, the Competitive Integrated Employment Transformation Grant Program, Part 4, the Recruitment, Education and Training, Retention and Career Advancements for the Direct Care Workforce, and Section 22042 of Part 5, Workforce Development Programs in Support of Communities and the Environment. This amendment ensures that the Department of Labor has resources it needs to fully carry out all of the programs funded under this legislation. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment and yield back. Does anyone seek recognition on the amendment? If not, the question is on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment will vote aye.
Aye.
All opposed, vote no.
No.
It appears the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. The next amendment I have is the gentlelady from North Carolina, the ranking member, has an amendment at the desk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amendment Foxx SMEMPFLSA at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee print offered by Ms. Foxx, identifier SMEMPFLSA.
The gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman reserves a point of order. The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes on behalf of her amendment. Gentlelady is on mute.
Pardon me, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Democrat ANS includes a provision to increase civil monetary penalties radically under the Fair Labor Standards Act by 900%, an unnecessary and punitive scheme which should not be imposed on small businesses. This provision in the ANS will have perverse implications and result in a lower level of accountability at DOL. As previously mentioned during this markup, a legislative change of this magnitude should be subject to hearings, consultations with affected stakeholders, including members of the small business community, and consideration of standalone legislation by this committee under regular order. Given the lack of legislative review, the convoluted process through which this reckless spending package is being rammed through, and the extreme nature of this provision, my amendment exempts the smallest of businesses from these excessive civil monetary penalties, which risk bankrupting establishments unable to afford a team of lawyers to interpret complicated federal labor laws or contested citations. The National Federation of Independent Business recently sent a letter to the committee expressing opposition to the legislation we are considering today. The letter made a compelling case against this provision, which I will quote in part. Quote, FLSA violations currently operate under a strict liability standard, meaning employers who have an honest misinterpretation of the law or made an isolated mistake are not given leniency under the law. For example, a small employer who makes a single error and forgets that his or her employees' hours exceeded the overtime threshold and inadvertently forgets to pay overtime to 10 employees can now be subject to $207,400 in fines. Small businesses do not have the operating revenue of larger businesses and simply cannot absorb these substantial fines, nor do they have legal counsel on retainer to negotiate lower fines with agency officials. This one-time error can ruin a small employer and permanently put them out of business. End quote. The NFIB letter makes a compelling case against this provision, and I ask unanimous consent that it be included in the record. Simply put, this Democrat scheme unfairly burdens small businesses with excessive penalties, making them little more than a funding mechanism for committee Democrats to hire an army of overzealous DOL inspectors. Small businesses make up 99.9% of U.S. firms, and they employ almost half of all U.S. employees, accounting for 2/3 of net new jobs. These job creators need certainty, not additional crushing mandates from federal policymakers as they recover from COVID-19. Committee Republicans understand that an unprecedented increase in fines will hurt job creation, and these burdens, coupled with overzealous enforcement by overfunded federal agencies, will be felt most strongly by the smallest of establishments. I urge my colleagues to protect small businesses and adopt this common sense amendment and say once again, it appears that the Democrats want to do everything possible to destroy business in this country. I yield back.
Thank you. And the letter will be entered in the record without objection. Is anyone seeking recognition on the amendment? The gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to strike the last word and speak in opposition to the amendment.
The lady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. The Fair Labor Standards Act sets the federal minimum wage, overtime pay, and child labor standards. These protections are critical for supporting the economic security of workers in our communities, many of whom were economically insecure before the pandemic. According to 2017 estimates, workers lost $15 billion each year from minimum wage violations alone. The average victim of minimum wage violations losing nearly a quarter of their weekly earnings. That's why it's critical that enforcement agencies have the tools to curb wage theft. The FLSA grants the Labor Secretary authority to access civil monetary penalties against employers who commit wage theft or violate child labor standards. But according to a 2021 paper, even for the most egregious violators, repeat and willful, the median offender had to pay a penalty of only 29 cents per dollar of wages owed. Currently, a violation of child labor standards that causes the death of a minor is only subject to a $60,000 fine. Now, I would assume that anyone here would agree that a child's life is worth more than $60,000. This provision increases the maximum allowable penalty for wage theft and child labor violations. The Secretary would continue to have discretion in imposing penalties. As I'm sure my colleague is aware, the FLSA requires that the size of the business and the gravity of the violation be taken into account when determining the amount of the penalty. The FLSA also provides employers with a procedure for challenging penalties. This is not about punishing small businesses. Ensuring lawbreakers are held accountable for wage theft actually helps to create a level playing field for small businesses competing with law-breaking large companies. Penalties aren't assessed for minor innocent mistakes a small business might make. Wage theft penalties raise revenues by only fining lawbreakers who willfully or repeatedly violate minimum wage or overtime laws. So let me say that again. Willfully or repeatedly violate minimum wage or overtime laws. These revenues will allow the Wage and Hour Division to further its mission to protect workers and ensure businesses can compete on a level playing field. I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
The gentlelady yields back. Does anyone else seek recognition on the amendment? If not, gentleman from California.
I withdraw my reservation.
The reservation is withdrawn. The motion now is on the amendment offered by the ranking member. Those that favor the amendment will vote aye.
Aye.
Those opposed will vote no.
No.
The noes appear to have it.
Mr. Chairman, on that, I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested, and that request will be honored when we consider the other amendments. The next amendment I have listed is again to be offered by the gentlelady from North Carolina, our ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe I have the amendment you've been looking for, the last one. The amendment is Foxx EEOC-01 at the desk.
The gentlelady knows the committee well. Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee print offered by Ms. Foxx. Identifier EEOC_01.
The
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order.
the gentleman from California reserves a point of order, and the gentlelady from North Carolina, our ranking member, is recognized for 5 minutes on behalf of her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Democrat A&S provides an additional $321 million for the EEOC. This amendment ensures those funds cannot be used to rescind the updates to EEOC's compliance manual on religious discrimination, which were approved by the Commission on January 15, 2021. The compliance manual, which had not been revised since 2008, provides guidance for workers, employers, practitioners, and EEOC enforcement staff on religious discrimination. The January updates to the compliance manual provide guidance on the freedom of religious organizations to make religiously based employment decisions, as well as protections for religious employees under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The First Amendment states that, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, end quote. The protections in Title VII for religious organizations and workers help to carry out this founding principle. The EEOC's updated guidance on religious discrimination is more important than ever because of increasingly frequent attacks on religious liberty. For example, the Department of Labor is taking steps to rescind a rule clarifying the rights of religious organizations to engage in federal contracting. In addition, Chairman Scott has publicly opposed this rule because he views it as too protective of religious freedom, even though the rule follows Supreme Court precedent. Moreover, in 2019, the committee Democrats converted a full committee hearing in support of the Do No Harm Act, a radical bill that severely limits application of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993, even though RFRA passed Congress with near unanimous support. Religious liberty is fundamental to our republic and enshrined in the First Amendment to the Constitution. Committee Republicans will continue to support policies that protect this precious freedom. This amendment ensures important guidance and religious freedom remain in place at EEOC, and I urge my colleagues to support it. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. Does anyone seek recognition on this amendment? Gentlelady from Oregon.
I seek recognition. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word to oppose the amendment.
And the gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank the gentlelady from North Carolina, but I submit that this amendment could cause unintended and harmful consequences. In January of 2021, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, voted to revise its compliance manual on religious discrimination. And despite the EEOC's compliance manual being an extremely dense and comprehensive document containing substantial, nuanced, and detailed legal analysis, the process for developing the guidance left much to be desired. The process was short-circuited, concerningly failed to engage key stakeholders. And despite requests, there was no public hearing. Moreover, in contrast to the previous 2008 edition that was adopted unanimously, this guidance manual was adopted by a partisan vote of the Commission. The bill we're currently considering would provide funding for EEOC for the next 5 years, and Ranking Member Fox's amendment would preclude any changes from being made to the compliance manual during that time period. The committee heard from stakeholders and religious groups that were shocked by the speed at which the EEOC developed this updated guidance. And for this reason, and because we should not prevent changes to the compliance manual from being made over the next 5 years, I urge my colleagues to vote no on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back. Does anyone else seek recognition on this amendment? If not, the gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I withdraw my reservation.
The reservation is withdrawn. The question now is on the amendment offered by the ranking member. All that favor the amendment will vote aye.
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 All opposed, vote no.
No.
Noes appear to have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for recorded vote.
The recorded vote is requested, and that will be honored when we consider the other amendments. Are there other amendments? There appear not to be amendments, so I will therefore.
Somebody needs to mute, Mr. Chairman.
Say again, I will therefore recognize Mr. Takano for a motion to move the previous question on the bill and the amendment thereto.
Mr. Chairman, I move the previous question on the bill and the amendment thereto.
The question, and this will prohibit any other amendments while we're considering the amendments. Once we get to the votes, that will be just voting, not other amendments will not be in order. The question is ordering the previous question. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed will say no. All those in favor of the previous question will say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it. The previous question having been ordered, the amendment in nature of a substitute. On the amendment nature of a substitute, no further debate or amendments are in order. The question is now on agreeing to the amendment in nature of a substitute.
No, we're not voting.
As amended, but we're gonna break now since we have several hours worth of amendments. We had indicated that we were going to carry over to the second day. So we'll continue this meeting until 1 o'clock tomorrow. There's a Democratic Caucus meeting at noon. And so directly after that, at 1 o'clock, we will